Welcome to Fractal Enigma Audio Previews, the podcast where we let you climb into our audiobooks before you commit. Think of it like a test drive, except instead of a car, it's a love story. And instead of around the block, we're giving you the first few chapters completely free right here in your ears. Every episode, we drop an extended preview of one of our latest romance audiobooks. You listen, you fall in love with the characters, you get hooked right at the good part. And then, if we've done our job, you grab the full book because you physically cannot not know what happens next. Season 2 starts now, and we're kicking things off at 37,000 feet. This is High Mistress by Aurora North, a Sapphic romance about an ice queen consultant who hasn't been touched in over a year, and the flight attendant who's about to wreck that streak in a first-class lavatory somewhere over Colorado. This one is explicit. Fair warning. You're about to hear the first 5 chapters. Links to the full book are in the description. Let's fly. Chapter 1. Seat 2A.
The boarding pass said 34B. Middle seat. Economy. On a red-eye. Vivian Lane stared at the crumpled paper in her hand like it had personally insulted her, which, in a way, it had. She'd flown 1.2 million miles with this airline. She had a titanium loyalty card that weighed more than her conscience. She had once, in a moment of wine-fueled honesty, admitted to her therapist that the sound of a jet bridge connecting to a fuselage was the closest thing she had to a lullaby. And her assistant had booked her in a middle seat. Former assistant. That decision had been made somewhere between the gate and the Keel's kiosk. She stood at the edge of the boarding queue at LAX Terminal B, phone pressed to her ear, watching families in matching Disney shirts shuffle toward the jet bridge like cattle in athleisure. Gate B47. The 11:15 p.m. to JFK. 5 hours and 12 minutes between her and a client presentation that could make or break the Meridian Hotel's account, a $40 million engagement that James Whitfield had dangled in front of her like a golden carrot on a partnership track stick. I don't care that it was a system error, Marcus. She kept her voice flat. Surgical. The kind of tone that made junior analysts develop stress rashes. I care that I specifically requested an aisle seat in business class, and I'm currently looking at a boarding pass that suggests I'll be spending the next 5 hours sandwiched between a man in cargo shorts and someone's emotional support Pomeranian. Marcus sputtered something about fare classes and availability windows. Let me be clear. She shifted her leather tote higher on her shoulder. By the time I land at JFK, I want the Meridian deck reformatted, the Q3 projections recalculated with the updated RevPAR numbers, and your resignation on my desk. Pick 2. She hung up before he could pick. The gate agent, a tired-looking woman with a name tag that read Patricia, and an expression that suggested Patricia had seen some things, glanced at her boarding pass, then at her screen, then back at Vivian with the resigned look of someone about to either ruin or rescue a stranger's evening. Ms. Lane? Yes. I see you're one of our Diamond Elite members. I am. Patricia's fingers moved across the keyboard. We had a last-minute cancellation in first. I can move you up if you'd like. The relief was physical. She felt her shoulders drop half an inch, the only outward sign she'd allow. That would be acceptable. Patricia printed a new boarding pass and handed it over with the ghost of a smile. C2A. Enjoy your flight. Vivian took the pass and allowed herself exactly one moment of gratitude before her brain reclassified it as corrected injustice and moved on. She boarded ahead of the Disney families and the cargo shorts contingent, ducking through the first-class curtain into the rarefied air of leather seats and actual legroom. The cabin was half full, a silver-haired man in 1A already asleep under an eye mask, a 20-something tech bro in 3C wearing noise-canceling headphones the size of dinner plates. C2A was a window. She preferred aisle, but tonight she'd take it. She stowed her tote in the overhead, settled into the leather, and immediately cataloged her environment the way she cataloged everything: the weight of the blanket, adequate; the thread count of the pillowcase, passable; the width of the armrest, sufficient. Order. Control. A place for everything and everything precisely where she'd put it. She buckled her seatbelt and pulled it tight across her lap. Ritual. Some people prayed before flights. Vivian Lane buckled in and opened her laptop. The Meridian deck glowed on her screen. 47 slides. Revenue optimization strategy for a luxury hotel chain that wanted to hemorrhage less money on their European properties. It was good work, her work mostly, with Marcus's clumsy fingerprints on the financial modeling. She'd fix it on the flight. She always fixed it on the flight. Her best work happened somewhere between takeoff and cruising altitude, suspended in the in-between, untethered from the ground and all the things on it she didn't want to think about. Her phone buzzed. A calendar reminder: Mom's birthday. She dismissed it without reading the details. She already knew the details. She'd set the reminder 2 years ago and hadn't been able to bring herself to delete it, so every year it appeared, a tiny digital ghost tapping on her shoulder at the worst possible moments. 2 years. 26 months, technically. She'd been in Singapore, presenting to the board of a shipping conglomerate, when her phone rang at 3 a.m. local time. The hospital. Her mother. A stroke. Come home. She'd caught the first flight out, but Singapore to Burbank wasn't a quick trip, and her mother, Linda Lane, retired postal worker, amateur watercolorist, the only person on earth who'd ever seen Vivian cry, had died alone in a hospital bed at 4:47 p.m. Pacific time while Vivian was somewhere over the Pacific Ocean, 37,000 feet from the only thing that mattered. She hadn't stopped moving since. 212 days on the road last year. 37 countries. Every major airport lounge on 5 continents. If she kept moving, she didn't have to stand still long enough to feel the specific weight of a grief she'd been deferring, like a tax payment she couldn't afford. The cabin lights dimmed to that pre-departure amber. Outside the window, the tarmac glistened under sodium lights, ground crew in reflective vests moving with choreographed efficiency. A fuel truck pulled away. Somewhere beneath her feet, her suitcase was being loaded into a cargo hold alongside the bags of 180 strangers, and that felt right. Her life packed neatly, stored in the belly of something designed to leave. Good evening. The voice was warm and slightly musical, with a faint accent that curled around the vowels like smoke. Vivian looked up from her laptop. The flight attendant standing at the edge of her row was not what she'd expected. She wasn't sure what she'd expected. The usual pleasant corporate veneer probably, but this woman was something else entirely. Short. 5'5" maybe, in her low heels. Curvy in a way the airline's navy uniform hadn't been designed to accommodate but was accommodating anyway. The fitted skirt sitting snug on her hips, the blazer nipped at a waist that flared into. Vivian stopped cataloging. That was enough cataloging. The woman's hair was pulled into a sleek bun at the nape of her neck, dark and glossy. Her skin was bronze, sun-warmed even under the cabin's artificial light. Wide brown eyes, a full mouth slicked in something berry-colored, and a dimple in her left cheek that appeared when she smiled, which she was doing now. At Vivian. With an intensity that felt less like customer service, and more like a dare. Her name tag read Remy. Welcome to first class. Remy held a tray with 2 champagne flutes, the bubbles catching the overhead light. Pre-departure beverage? Gin. Neat. If you have it. We have everything. Remy set the champagne tray on the armrest between seats and leaned in slightly, close enough that Vivian caught her scent. Something warm and slightly sweet, like vanilla layered under something darker. But I'd recommend the champagne tonight. It's actually decent, which is rare for us. I don't drink champagne. You don't drink champagne yet? Remy lifted a flute and offered it, holding the stem between 2 fingers with red polished nails. First time in first? Vivian accepted the glass, and their fingers brushed on the stem. The contact lasted maybe half a second. Vivian felt it travel from her fingertips to the base of her skull, a current she hadn't invited and didn't appreciate. "I practically live here," she said. Flat. Dismissive. The tone that sent junior analysts scurrying. Remy didn't scurry. Remy's dimple deepened. "Then you should know," she said, dipping her voice to something just above a whisper. "We take very good care of our regulars." She straightened, collected the tray, and moved to the next row without looking back, her hips swaying with the particular cadence of someone who knew exactly what kind of wake she left behind her. Vivian watched her go for 2 full seconds before catching herself and redirecting her eyes to the laptop. The Meridian Deck. Slide 14. RevPAR assumptions for the Barcelona property. She took a sip of the champagne. It was annoyingly good. Focus. She focused. For approximately 11 minutes, long enough to fix Marcus's formula errors on slides 14 through 19 and add a footnote about seasonal rate compression, before the captain's voice crackled through the PA with the standard pre-takeoff monologue. Flight time 5 hours 12 minutes. Cruising altitude 37,000 feet, weather clear over the continental United States, with possible turbulence over the Rockies. She'd heard it 10,000 times. Background noise. Elevator music for people who lived in the sky. The engine spooled. That deep gathering roar that vibrated through the floor and up through the seat into her spine. She loved that sound, the promise of departure, of distance, of the ground falling away until it became abstract. She closed her laptop and tucked it into the seat pocket, pressing her head back against the headrest as the aircraft began its taxi. Takeoff was uneventful. LAX to the east, over the basin of city lights, the banked turn that showed all of Los Angeles spread below like a circuit board on fire. She watched it shrink through the window until the clouds swallowed it, and there was nothing but dark sky and the steady thrum of engines doing what engines do. The seatbelt sign dinged off. The cabin settled into the particular hush of a red-eye, phones silenced, reading lights clicking on, the muffled symphony of 200 people pretending to sleep. Vivian reopened her laptop. Slide 20. Competitive landscape analysis. "I brought you the gin." Remy was back, holding a rocks glass with 2 fingers of clear liquid. She set it on the tray table beside Vivian's laptop with a precision that seemed practiced and also, somehow, intimate, like she was placing a chess piece. "I didn't order it." "Consider it a loyalty bonus." Remy's eyes dropped to the laptop screen, a reflex quickly corrected, but not before she'd glimpsed the Meridian logo. "Burning the midnight oil at midnight. That's commitment." "That's Tuesday." Remy laughed. A real laugh, not the performative tinkle of service industry pleasantry, but something from her chest that made her eyes crinkle. "Fair enough. If you need anything else," she paused, and there was something in the pause, something weighted. "Press the call button. I'm here all night." She moved on. Vivian picked up the gin and took a sip, letting the juniper cut through the cloying sweetness of the champagne still on her palate. She stared at the screen without reading it. "I'm here all night." She was reading into it. She was a consultant. She read into everything. It was a professional statement from a service professional doing her job. There was nothing beneath it. The brush of fingers on the champagne stem was accidental. The scent was just perfume. The voice was just a voice. She drank her gin and worked until her eyes blurred, then stowed the laptop, reclined her seat, and pulled the blanket up to her chin. Outside the window, the sky was an unbroken black, no stars visible from this altitude, just the faint pulse of the wingtip light marking their passage through nothing. She closed her eyes. Thought about the Meridian presentation. Thought about firing Marcus. Thought about the calendar reminder she'd dismissed, and the birthday cake she used to buy from the bakery on Magnolia. Carrot cake, cream cheese frosting, Linda written in blue cursive because her mother had loved blue and had never outgrown the childlike delight of seeing her own name on a cake. Thought about a dimple in a left cheek, and the way very good care sounded when delivered at close range by a woman with berry-colored lips. She opened her eyes and stared at the seat back in front of her. No. She didn't do this. She didn't get derailed by flight attendants or anyone else. She was Vivian Lane. She billed at $1,200 an hour. She had a corner office she never used because she was never in it, and a condo in Brentwood she'd furnished entirely from a restoration hardware catalog because she couldn't be bothered to develop a personal aesthetic for a space she occupied 47 days a year. She was a machine. A beautiful, efficient, gin-drinking machine who converted air miles into billable hours and emotional distance into professional excellence. She closed her eyes again. When she fell asleep, she dreamed of turbulence, the plane shaking, her hands gripping the armrests, and a voice close to her ear saying, "Breathe with me," in a tone that made breathing the last thing on her mind. She woke 40 minutes before landing to find a fresh glass of water on her tray table, the ice not yet melted. A cocktail napkin beneath it. On the napkin in neat handwriting, "Sweet dreams, 2A." Vivian held the napkin between two fingers, studying the handwriting, confident, slightly slanted, the kind of penmanship that suggested parochial school or a grandmother who didn't tolerate laziness. She should throw it away. It was a napkin. It was nothing. She folded it once, precisely, and slipped it into her blazer pocket. The plane began its descent into JFK. The cabin lights came up in gentle stages, coaxing passengers out of their chemical sleeps. Outside the window, the eastern seaboard materialized through cloud cover, the first gray suggestion of the Atlantic, then Long Island sprawling below, then the unmistakable geometry of New York City, all right angles and ambition, a place that matched her energy exactly. The landing was textbook. The kind of smooth, barely there touchdown that made you wonder if the wheels had actually touched the ground, or if the pilot had simply willed the plane into compliance. They taxied to the gate, and the seatbelt sign dinged off, and 180 people immediately stood up, despite having nowhere to go for the next 8 minutes. Vivian stayed seated. She always stayed seated. Standing in an aisle to gain no measurable advantage was the mark of an amateur. When the line finally moved, she rose, retrieved her tote, and joined the shuffle toward the forward galley. The first-class cabin emptied quickly, only 4 passengers tonight, and as she approached the exit, she saw Remy stationed at the aircraft door. Standard positioning. The farewell gauntlet. "Thank you for flying with us, bye-bye, have a great evening." She'd walked past 1,000 flight attendants at 1,000 aircraft doors and never once registered their faces. Remy was leaning against the doorframe with the easy grace of someone who spent her life in transit and had made peace with it. Her blazer was unbuttoned now, the top button of her blouse undone, and her eyes found Vivian's with an accuracy that suggested she'd been tracking her approach. "Thank you for choosing us tonight, Ms. Lane. Professional. Perfect. The kind of thing you'd say to any Diamond Elite passenger." Then she leaned forward, barely, just enough that her lips were near Vivian's ear, close enough that Vivian could feel the warmth of her breath, and pressed something into Vivian's hand. "For turbulence emergencies," Remy murmured. And then, louder, brighter, with that service industry smile snapped back into place, "Have a wonderful stay in New York." Vivian walked up the jet bridge on autopilot. Through the door, past the gate agent, into the fluorescent purgatory of JFK Terminal 4 at 6 a.m. She looked down at what Remy had pressed into her palm. A cocktail napkin. A phone number. And underneath it, in that same confident, slightly slanted hand, "For turbulence emergencies. R." Vivian stopped in the middle of the terminal. Travelers streamed around her like water around a stone, wheeling their bags toward baggage claim and coffee in the city beyond, and she stood there, holding a napkin with a phone number on it, and felt something she hadn't felt in a very long time. She didn't have a name for it yet. It sat in her chest like a small, warm stone, unexpected, inconvenient, and impossible to ignore. She pocketed the napkin. She did not text. But she didn't throw it away either, and for Vivian Lane, that was practically a declaration of war. Chapter 2. The Nervous One. The thing about Hinge was that it gave you just enough hope to keep swiping and just enough disappointment to make you question every life choice that had led you to a dating app in the first place. She showed up in Birkenstocks, Remy said, stuffing a stack of linen napkins into the first-class galley cart with more force than the napkins deserved. Not like the trendy ones. The orthopedic ones. With socks. Donnie Reeves, 5'10", razor-cut blonde bob, the kind of bone-dry sarcasm that could dehydrate a cactus, leaned against the galley counter and crossed her arms. Were the socks at least cute? They had little avocados on them. I'm going to need you to tell me you still slept with her. I have standards, Donnie. You slept with a barista in Reykjavik who thought Finland was a city. She had great hands. Remy shut the cart with a satisfying click and turned to face her best friend, crew wife, and the only person on Earth allowed to judge her love life. Also, Finland isn't the point. The point is, I'm done. I'm deleting the apps. All of them. You said that after Denver. Denver was a relapse. And Portland? Portland doesn't count. We were snowed in. Danny's eyebrow climbed her forehead in a way that suggested she had a detailed spreadsheet of Remy's romantic failures and was considering presenting it at the next crew briefing. Babe, you've been on 4 dates in 3 cities in 2 weeks. That's not dating. That's a world tour of bad decisions. Remy couldn't argue with the math. She was 28 years old, had been flying international routes for 7 years, and had perfected the art of the layover hookup to a degree that would have made her mother weep and her abuela cross herself. The formula was simple: land somewhere beautiful, find someone beautiful, have a beautiful night, and leave before the morning got complicated. No strings. No routes. No forwarding address. It worked. It had always worked. She was happy. She was fine. She was also, if she was being honest with herself, which she tried to avoid before a red eye, profoundly, catastrophically lonely, but that was a problem for future Remy, and present Remy had a first-class cabin to prep. I don't do feelings at 30,000 feet, she said, straightening the champagne flutes on the pre-departure tray. Below 10,000? Also no. So your emotional range is exclusively ground level, where you spend approximately 9 days a month. It's a tight window. I make it work. Donnie opened her mouth to deliver what would have undoubtedly been a devastating rebuttal, but the forward cabin door signal chimed, passengers boarding, and they both snapped into performance mode with the practiced ease of women who could go from roasting each other's life choices to welcome aboard in under 2 seconds. Showtime, Remy said, smoothing her skirt and checking her reflection in the galley's stainless steel panel. Hair bun sleek secure. Lipstick berry fresh deadly. Uniform, fitted, pressed, doing God's work on her hips. She adjusted the collar of her blouse, tugged her blazer straight, and picked up the champagne tray. Donnie was working economy tonight, a punishment from scheduling she'd earned by calling a passenger's emotional support peacock a health code violation on the previous month's SFO Honolulu. So the first-class cabin was Remy's domain, 4 passengers, 3 hours of service, and the particular pleasure of pouring expensive champagne for people who could afford to buy the vineyard. She stepped through the curtain and into the soft-lit cabin, tray balanced on her palm, smile calibrated to the precise frequency of "I am delighted to serve you and also I could end you if necessary." Seat 1A, older gentleman already asleep, eye mask on. Veteran flyer. He'd want nothing and tip generously for being left alone. She set a water on his tray table and moved on. Seat 2A. The woman was new. Not new to flying, she had that particular stillness of someone who'd logged enough air miles to become furniture, but new to Remy. And Remy noticed new people the way she noticed weather patterns, instinctively, constantly, and with an eye for what might become dangerous. This one was tall, even-seated. Pale skin that looked like it hadn't seen unfiltered sunlight in months. Black hair and a severe bob, blunt bangs, the kind of cut that cost $300 and announced "I make decisions." Ice blue eyes focused on a laptop screen with the intensity of someone defusing a bomb. Charcoal blazer over a cream silk blouse, 2 buttons undone, enough to suggest collarbones but not enough to suggest invitation. A single diamond stud in her left ear caught the reading light and threw a tiny prism onto the seatback. She was objectively stunning. The kind of stunning that wasn't trying to be, that was just the byproduct of sharp bones and good posture and the absolute refusal to give a single fuck about whether anyone was looking. Remy was looking. "Good evening." She stopped at the edge of the row, tray extended. "Welcome to first class. Pre-departure beverage?" The woman looked up from her laptop, and Remy felt the full weight of those ice-blue eyes land on her like a searchlight. There was something in them, not warmth exactly but a flicker of something, that lasted half a second before it was shuttered behind a wall of professional composure so seamless it could have been load-bearing. "Gin. Neat. If you have it." Her voice was low and precise. The kind of voice that issued directives, not requests. Remy liked it immediately. She liked it in a way that was professionally inappropriate and personally inconvenient, and she filed that information in the mental folder marked Things to Unpack Never. "We have everything," Remy said, which was true and also a flirtation she hadn't authorized her mouth to make. She set the champagne tray on the armrest and leaned in, not too close, just close enough to make the space between them feel intentional. "But I'd recommend the champagne tonight. It's actually decent, which is rare for us." "I don't drink champagne." "You don't drink champagne yet?" Remy lifted a flute and offered it, holding the stem between her fingers, red nails bright against the glass. The woman took it. Their fingers brushed. Remy felt it in her wrist, her throat, the backs of her knees, a full-body acknowledgement of contact that was wildly disproportionate to its cause. Half a second of skin against skin. The woman's hands were elegant and manicured, short nails, no rings. Remy noticed these things because Remy noticed everything, especially hands, and especially the hands of women who looked like they could restructure your entire personality with a glance. "First time in first?" The woman's expression didn't change, but something behind it shifted. A hairline fracture in the ice. "I practically live here." "Then you should know," Remy said, dropping her voice to something that lived in the register between professional and sinful, "we take very good care of our regulars." She held the woman's gaze for 1 beat longer than service protocol recommended, then straightened and moved to 3C, the tech bro, who wanted sparkling water and didn't look up from his phone, with the deliberate ease of someone who absolutely had not just felt her pulse in her eardrums over a champagne handoff. Back in the galley, she poured the gin neat and set it on a service tray, then caught her own reflection in the steel panel again. Flushed. She was flushed. A 30-second interaction with a passenger, and her body had decided to stage a mutiny. "Get it together, Santos." She delivered the gin. She delivered dinner. She delivered a warm towel, a blanket refresh, and a bottle of water, each interaction a small, curated point of contact that she told herself was just excellent service, and not an elaborate excuse to stand near this woman and breathe the same recycled air. She learned things. The laptop had a Meridian Hotels logo on the deck. Consultant, probably. The gin disappeared in measured sips, not gulped, not savored, just consumed with the mechanical efficiency of someone who drank to function, not to feel. The woman worked with a focus that bordered on compulsive, fingers moving across the keyboard in sharp bursts, pausing only to push her bangs out of her eyes with a gesture so precise it might have been choreographed. She didn't smile. Not once. Not at Remy, not at her screen, not at anything. She existed in a state of immaculate, untouchable control, and Remy, who had built her entire adult life around the principle that she didn't get invested in people she couldn't keep, found herself wanting, with a specificity that alarmed her, to know what that control looked like when it broke. Dangerous thought. Discard immediately. She discarded it. It came back. She discarded it again. It came back with friends. 2 hours into the flight, somewhere over Nevada, the turbulence started. Not the gentle jostle that made passengers look up from their iPads, the real kind. The kind where the plane dropped without warning, and your stomach hit your tonsils, and the overhead bins rattled like something alive was inside them trying to get out. The seatbelt sign dinged on with the urgency of a smoke alarm, and the captain's voice, calm, measured, lying through his teeth, announced they were experiencing moderate chop, and to please remain seated. Remy braced against the galley counter with one hand and the cart latch with the other, riding it out with the practiced nonchalance of someone who'd been through worse over the Hindu Kush at 3 a.m. Turbulence didn't scare her. Turbulence was just the sky reminding you it was in charge. But when she looked out into the cabin, checking seats, scanning for distress, her eyes snagged on 2A. The woman was not okay. The laptop was closed. Both hands were on the armrests, gripping so hard the tendons stood out like cables under porcelain skin. Her jaw was clenched, teeth pressed together, and her chest was moving in short, shallow pulls that weren't breathing so much as trying to breathe and failing. Her eyes were squeezed shut, and beneath the cabin's dim lighting, Remy could see a sheen of sweat at her hairline. Panic attack. Textbook. Remy moved before she made the conscious decision to move. Through the curtain, down the aisle, steadying herself on seatbacks as the plane bucked, until she was crouching beside 2A, one hand on the armrest, close enough to see the rapid pulse in the woman's throat. Hey. Low. Steady. The voice she used for scared children and first-time flyers and anyone whose body had decided, at 37,000 feet, to betray them. I need you to look at me. The woman's eyes opened. They were glassy, unfocused, somewhere between the cabin and whatever catastrophe her brain was constructing. The ice in them had melted into something raw and terrified, and the nakedness of it, the utter absence of the control that had defined her all evening, hit Remy in the center of her chest like a fist. Just me, Remy said. She placed her hand over the woman's on the armrest. Didn't grab, didn't squeeze, just laid her palm over those white-knuckled fingers and let the warmth of it register. Look at me. Right here. The woman's eyes locked on Remy's. The plane shuddered. Neither of them flinched. Breathe with me, okay? In through your nose, slow, like you're smelling something incredible. Remy inhaled, exaggerating it, keeping her eyes on the woman's. And out through your mouth. Like you're blowing out a candle. The woman tried. The first attempt was ragged, catching in her throat. The second was better. The third was almost a real breath. Good. That's good. Again. They breathed together. The turbulence continued, the plane jolting and recovering, but the woman's focus stayed on Remy. Her grip on the armrest loosened by degrees. Her jaw unclenched. The pulse in her throat slowed from hummingbird to something approaching human. Remy didn't move her hand. She kept it there, warm over cool, steady over shaking, and counted breaths until the woman's matched her own. 2 minutes. 3. The turbulence eased. The plane settled into a gentle, rolling sway, the aftershock of a sky tantrum, and the seatbelt sign stayed on, but the danger had passed. The woman blinked. Looked down at Remy's hand on hers. Looked back up. The mortification arrived like a weather system. Remy watched it cross her face in real time. The vulnerability shuddered, the walls rebuilt brick by brick, and the woman's spine straightened as if pulled by strings. She slid her hand out from under Remy's and pressed it flat against her own thigh. I'm fine. I know. It doesn't usually, she stopped. Swallowed. Started again in that clipped, controlled voice, but it was thinner now, the edges frayed. I apologize. That was unprofessional. You're not at work. You're on a plane. Remy stayed crouched, keeping herself at eye level, none threatening. Happens to the best of us. You should see me during a hard landing. I'm a complete disaster. A lie. Remy hadn't flinched during a landing since her second month of training. But the woman's mouth twitched, not a smile but the ghost of one, the structural foundation upon which a smile might eventually be built, and Remy counted it as a win. Can I get you some water? I have water. Can I get you better water? Almost. Almost a smile. I'm fine. Really? Remy stood. Her knees protested. Crouching in a pencil skirt in a moving aircraft was not in the ergonomics manual, and she straightened her blazer with a practiced tug. If you need anything, call button's right there. I mean it. You've done more than enough. Their eyes held for a moment longer than necessary. The raw thing was still there, behind the ice, behind the walls, a flicker of something that might have been gratitude or vulnerability, or the particular terror of being seen by a stranger in a moment you'd have paid good money to erase. Remy nodded once and walked back to the galley. Donnie was waiting, having appeared from economy with the stealth of a woman who could smell drama through a curtain. You were gone 9 minutes. She was having a panic attack. Aha! Danny's eyes were doing that thing where they communicated an entire thesis on Remy's romantic patterns without blinking. Was she hot? Remy busied herself rearranging the galley cart, which was already perfectly arranged. She was a passenger in medical distress. A hot passenger in medical distress. I'm not dignifying that. You don't have to. Your face is doing it for you. Remy's face, the traitor, was indeed doing something she couldn't control. She turned away from Donnie and focused on the beverage inventory, counting miniature bottles of Tanqueray with the concentration of someone defusing a bomb. Remy. What? You just counted the gin twice. Quality assurance. Donnie was quiet for a moment, a tactical silence designed to make Remy fill the gap, a technique she'd been deploying since they'd been paired on their first international rotation 4 years ago. Remy didn't fill the gap. She pulled a bottle of water from the cart, twisted the cap off, poured it into a glass with a slice of cucumber she'd prepped during boarding, and set it on a tray. What are you doing? Donnie asked. Hydration follow-up. Standard post-incident protocol. There is no post-incident hydration protocol. There is now. She carried the water to 2A. The woman had her laptop open again, working or performing the act of working, her fingers moving with less conviction than before. She looked up when Remy appeared, and this time the wall had a door in it. I thought you might want this. Remy set the glass on the tray table. Cucumber water. It's pretentious, but it works. The woman stared at the glass, then at Remy, and something shifted in her expression, a softening so slight it would have been invisible to anyone who wasn't looking for it, which Remy absolutely was. Thank you. 2 words. But she said them like she meant them, not the automatic thank you of a service transaction, but the real kind, the kind that acknowledged something had happened between them that wasn't in either of their job descriptions. Remy smiled. Not her service smile, not her flirt smile, but the one that came from somewhere behind her sternum and that she didn't use often because it made her feel exposed. You're welcome to. She went back to the galley. Finished the service. Ran through the pre-landing checklist. Did her cross-check. Stood at the aircraft door for deplaning, delivering the standard farewells on autopilot while every nerve in her body tracked the approach of one specific passenger. When the woman reached the door, Remy said the standard line, "Thank you for choosing us tonight, Ms. Lane," because the boarding manifest had given her a name, and the name had been circling her brain like a song she couldn't shake. Vivian Lane. Then she leaned in, just enough, just barely, and pressed the napkin into Vivian's hand. The one she'd written her number on during the descent, while Donnie watched with the expression of someone composing a eulogy for Remy's common sense. For turbulence emergencies, she murmured, and then snapped back to bright, professional, bulletproof. Vivian walked up the jet bridge without looking back. Remy stood at the aircraft door and watched her go until she disappeared around the corner, the click of Louboutin heels fading into the ambient noise of JFK at dawn. You're in trouble, Donnie said from behind her. I know. Like real trouble. Not layover trouble. Not Reykjavik barista trouble. Trouble. I know, Donnie. She didn't even smile at you. I know. And you gave her your number anyway. Remy turned from the door and began collecting headrest covers from the first-class seats, stripping them with mechanical efficiency while her brain ran a highlight reel of ice blue eyes going from terrified to grateful to guarded in the space of 3 minutes. She almost smiled, Remy said, balling a headdress cover between her palms. Twice. Donnie appeared beside her, arms full of used blankets, wearing the particular expression of a woman who loved her best friend enough to watch her walk into traffic and document it for later. You know the policy, right? Fraternization. Passenger relationships. The thing Wendy Cho got fired for last year. Wendy Cho was dating a passenger's husband. The policy doesn't distinguish. The policy is vague and unenforceable. The policy is vague and absolutely enforceable when they want it to be, which is whenever it's convenient for them. Donnie stopped, blankets clutched to her chest. Remy. I'm serious. She's a passenger. A regular, by the look of her status. If someone sees something, there's nothing to see. Remy shoved the last headrest cover into the laundry bag. I gave a panicking passenger a glass of cucumber water and my phone number. That's not fraternization. That's customer retention. Donnie stared at her for a long, eloquent moment. Customer retention, she repeated. Exactly. You're going to get your heart broken. You can't break what you don't put on the table. Oh, honey. Donnie shook her head and headed for the economy cabin. You put it on the table, under the table, and wrote your phone number on it in berry lipstick. Remy finished her post-flight duties, filed her crew report, and caught the shuttle to the JFK layover hotel, a Holiday Inn Express near the airport that smelled like industrial carpet cleaner and the collective exhaustion of 100,000 transient workers. Her room was on the 4th floor. 2 double beds, blackout curtains, a bathroom the size of a confessional. She'd slept in worse. She'd slept in much worse. The crew hotel in Lagos had once given her a room with a ceiling fan that detached mid-spin and embedded itself in the headboard like a throwing star. She showered, hotel water pressure tragically adequate, and stood in the steam-fogged bathroom, towel around her body, looking at her reflection in the slowly clearing mirror. 28. 7 years in the sky. 43 countries. An apartment in El Segundo, she occupied 9 days a month and had decorated with a combination of airport gift shop finds and things she couldn't bear to throw away from places she'd never returned to. A Moroccan rug from Marrakesh. A glass lamp from Istanbul. A framed photo of her abuela on the kitchen counter because Rosa Santos was the only fixed point in Remy's deliberately unfixed life. She picked up her phone. No new messages. Of course not. Vivian Lane didn't seem like the type to text. Vivian Lane seemed like the type to analyze the napkin for hidden clauses, run a cost-benefit analysis on the emotional implications of a phone call, and ultimately decide that engaging with a flight attendant was a suboptimal allocation of her personal bandwidth. Remy set the phone on the counter, climbed into the stiff hotel sheets, and stared at the water-stained ceiling. She thought about the way Vivian's hand had felt under hers, cold, clenched, trembling. The way it had slowly uncurled as Remy talked her through the breathing. The way those ice-blue eyes had looked at her in the aftermath, stripped of every defense, and how the vulnerability in them had lasted exactly 4 seconds before the walls went back up so fast, Remy almost heard the locks click. She thought about Vivian's throat. The pulse she'd seen there, fast, scared, alive. The way her silk blouse had shifted with each ragged breath, the collarbone catching light, the hollow at the base of her neck where Remy had wanted, absurdly and inappropriately, to press her mouth. She thought about the way Vivian had said, "I apologize," that was unprofessional, after a panic attack at 37,000 feet to a stranger, as if losing control of her body was a lapse in workplace decorum. What did a woman like that sound like when she came undone? Not from fear, from pleasure. What did that voice sound like when the clipped precision melted? What did those hands do when they weren't gripping armrests? Dangerous. Stupid. Stop. She rolled onto her stomach and pressed her face into the pillow. The hotel pillows smelled like bleach and someone else's shampoo. She closed her eyes and willed herself to sleep. Instead, she lay awake for 47 minutes, phone dark on the nightstand, waiting for a message from a woman who practically lived in the sky, but had looked, for 3 minutes during a patch of turbulence, like someone who had never once in her life been caught by anyone when she fell. When sleep finally came, Remy dreamed of ice blue eyes and the sound of the word fine spoken by someone who was anything but. She woke 6 hours later to a text from Donnie, Customer Retention LMAO. Let me know when you need a reference for your unemployment hearing. She did not wake to a text from Vivian Lane. She wasn't disappointed. She was fine. She was also, by any objective metric, completely full of shit. Chapter 3. 2 minutes. She didn't text. She thought about texting. She thought about it in the cab from JFK to the Mandarin Oriental. She thought about it in the shower, standing under water hot enough to scald, the cocktail napkin sitting on the marble vanity like evidence at a crime scene. She thought about it during the Meridian presentation, which she crushed, obviously, 47 slides delivered with the surgical precision of a woman who had channeled every ounce of sexual frustration into revenue optimization, and she thought about it at the hotel bar afterward, drinking gin neat while James Whitfield congratulated her via speakerphone from Los Angeles, and she stared at her own reflection in the mirror behind the top shelf and wondered when she'd started looking so tired. She didn't text because texting would be an acknowledgement would be a concession, and Vivian Lane did not concede. Not to clients, not to partners, not to gravity, and certainly not to a flight attendant with a dimple and a voice like warm honey, who had held her hand during a panic attack and made her feel for approximately 3 minutes like a human being instead of a consulting machine with a frequent flyer card. 3 days in New York. 3 days of back-to-back client dinners and strategy sessions, and a 6 a.m. run through Central Park that was supposed to clear her head, but instead gave her 7 uninterrupted miles to think about brown eyes and berry lipstick, and the sentence, "We take very good care of our regulars," delivered at a distance that violated several FAA personal space guidelines. On the second night, she took the napkin out again, sat on the edge of the hotel bed in a white robe, hair wet, and studied Remy's handwriting. The R was bold, slightly oversized, the kind of letter written by someone who took up space without apology. The phone number was neat, no hesitation marks, no crossed-out digits. She'd written it with confidence. With intention. Vivian typed the number into her phone. Did not press send. Deleted the draft. Typed it again. Deleted it again. She put the napkin in her wallet behind her Amex Black, where she wouldn't have to look at it but would know it was there, a splinter she couldn't reach and refused to acknowledge. On the third night, she checked the return flight manifest. This was a violation of at least 3 personal boundaries and 1 corporate data policy, but Vivian had access to the airline's Diamond Elite Concierge portal, which included crew information for her booked flights, and she was nothing if not resourceful when she wanted something she wouldn't admit to wanting. Remy Santos was not on her return flight. The disappointment was immediate, physical, and infuriating. It settled in her sternum like a stone, the same warm stone from the jetway, except now it was cold and heavy and felt a lot like something she refused to call longing, because longing was for people who read poetry and kept houseplants, and Vivian had killed every houseplant she'd ever owned through sheer neglect. She flew home to LA on a Thursday afternoon, first class, aisle seat. The flight attendant was a pleasant man named Craig, who did not have a dimple, did not smell like vanilla, and did not make Vivian's pulse do anything other than its standard, reliable 62 beats per minute. She drank her gin, worked her laptop, and felt nothing. Good, she told herself. That's how it's supposed to feel. She spent 4 days in Los Angeles. Worked from the Brentwood condo, the one she'd furnished entirely from a catalog, because choosing furniture required caring about a space, and caring about a space required staying in it, and staying required. She went to the office instead. Friday afternoon, James called her into his corner suite with the view of Century City that she'd been working toward for 11 years. "Meridian loved you," he said, leaning back in his chair with the easy confidence of a man who had never once questioned whether he belonged in a room. They want you on the European portfolio. London, Barcelona, Milan, the whole continental footprint. That's a significant expansion of scope. It's a significant expansion of your trajectory. This is the path, Lane. Another 18 months of this, and we're having a very different conversation about your future here. Partnership. The word he didn't say because he didn't need to. It hung in the air between them like a check waiting to be cashed. I'll need to review the travel schedule, she said. You'll need to live the travel schedule. We're talking 70% travel for the next year, minimum. New York, London, probably some Zurich. Can you handle it? Could she handle it? She almost laughed. She was built for it. She'd been running from her own life at 200% travel for 2 years, 70 was a vacation. Absolutely, she said. Good. James smiled. Book the LAX JFK for Monday. Meridian wants a follow-up session, and I want you leading it. She booked the flight that afternoon. Economy, Marcus was gone and his replacement hadn't learned the booking system yet. Red Eye. LAX to JFK. The same route. The same goddamn route. She checked the crew manifest. Her heart stopped. Not literally, she was a rational person and understood basic cardiology, but something in her chest seized and held like an engine catching when she saw the name on the first-class crew roster. R. Santos. She stared at the screen for a full minute. Then she closed the laptop, walked to the kitchen, poured a gin, drank it standing at the counter, poured another, and called her therapist. I need to talk about avoidance patterns, she said when Dr. Mehta picked up. That's our entire therapeutic relationship, Vivian. I'm aware. I need to talk about a specific one. Tell me. She did not tell her about Remy. She told her about the London assignment, about the travel, about the fact that the anniversary of her mother's death was in 6 weeks, and she'd already booked herself onto 3 continents for the surrounding dates. Dr. Mehta made the appropriate noises. Vivian deflected with the appropriate competence. They danced their familiar dance, Vivian approaching the edge of vulnerability, Dr. Mehta waiting patiently, Vivian retreating to the safety of intellectualization, and when the session ended, Vivian felt exactly as unresolved as she'd felt before, which was the standard outcome and one she'd come to accept as the cost of being her. Monday came. She packed her carry-on with the efficiency of a woman who could live out of a leather tote for 2 weeks without wrinkling a blouse. Cab to LAX. Terminal B, Gate B47. The same gate. The universe was either conspiring or mocking her, and she hadn't decided which. She boarded. Economy this time, no last-minute upgrade, no Patricia at the gate to rescue her. She found her middle seat in row 34, and settled in with the grim acceptance of someone who had made peace with suffering. The middle seat lasted 11 minutes. A gate agent appeared at her elbow. Ms. Lane? We have an open seat in first class. Complimentary upgrade for our Diamond Elite members. She didn't ask why. She didn't question the timing. She unbuckled, collected her tote, and walked to the front of the aircraft with the measured stride of someone who absolutely, definitely had not checked the crew manifest and was not expecting. Remy. Standing at the galley entrance, champagne tray in hand, hair in that perfect bun, berry lips slightly parted, eyes widening by exactly 1 millimeter when she saw Vivian come through the curtain. Their eyes met across 4 rows of first-class leather, and the warm stone in Vivian's chest detonated. Not a slow burn. Not a simmer. A detonation, sudden, devastating, total. Every defense she'd spent a week constructing, it was a momentary lapse, she's a stranger, you don't do this, collapsed like a building in an earthquake, floor by floor, until she was standing in the rubble of her own composure staring at a woman whose smile was spreading across her face like sunrise. 2A, Remy said. Welcome back. Vivian sat. Buckled in. Tighten the belt across her lap until it bit. Remy approached with the champagne. Her walk was different when she knew Vivian was watching. Or maybe it wasn't, maybe it had always been like that particular metronome sway of hips that made the navy skirt move in ways the airline's uniform committee had definitely not intended. Pre-departure beverage? Remy's voice was warm, amused, and laced with something underneath that Vivian felt in the pit of her stomach. We have gin. We have champagne. We have both, if you're feeling adventurous. Gin. You never called about that turbulence. Vivian looked up. Remy was standing close enough that the scent hit her again, vanilla and something deeper, and close enough that Vivian could see the tiny paper airplane tattooed behind her right ear, half hidden by a strand of dark hair that had escaped the bun. There wasn't any turbulence, Vivian said. Flat. Controlled. A lie so transparent it was practically stained glass. Remy's dimple appeared. There's always turbulence. You just haven't noticed it yet. She moved away to get the gin, and Vivian exhaled for what felt like the first time since boarding. The flight was 5 hours and 12 minutes. Vivian experienced approximately 0 of them in a state that could be described as calm. It started with the gin delivery, Remy's fingers lingering on the glass a beat too long, the pad of her thumb brushing the back of Vivian's hand. An accident that was not an accident. Vivian's skin burned where she'd been touched, a small bright point of heat that spread up her arm and settled in her chest. Then the blanket. Vivian hadn't asked for a blanket, but Remy brought one, unfolded it with a crisp snap, and draped it over Vivian's lap, smoothing it across her thighs with both hands in a gesture that was technically service and functionally foreplay. Her palms lingered a half-second too long on Vivian's legs, pressing the cashmere into the warmth beneath, and their eyes met above the blanket's edge and held. Comfortable? Remy asked. No, Vivian said honestly, because she was the opposite of comfortable. She was electrified, every nerve ending standing at attention, her body a live wire wrapped in a Stella McCartney blazer. Remy's lip quirked. Let me know if there's anything I can do. She disappeared into the galley. Vivian stared at the seat back and pressed her thighs together under the blanket, feeling the residual warmth of Remy's hands like a brand. Then dinner. Remy served the first-class meal, seared salmon, something with truffle. Vivian couldn't taste any of it, and leaned across Vivian's body to place the breadbasket on the far side of the tray, her breasts at Vivian's eye level, the top 2 buttons of her blouse straining against the lean. The scent was everywhere. Vivian's hand twitched on the armrest. Sorry, Remy murmured, straightening. Tight quarters up here. Vivian ate without registering a single flavor. She drank her gin. She opened her laptop and stared at a spreadsheet that might as well have been written in Mandarin. She closed the laptop. 2 hours in, the cabin went dark. Red-eye protocol, lights dimmed to near black, window shades drawn, passengers cocooned in their flatbed pods. The silver-haired man in 1A was snoring softly. Tech bro in 3C was unconscious under his headphones. The 2 remaining passengers in row 4 had been asleep since wheels up. Vivian was alone in a dark cabin, vibrating with something she hadn't felt in so long she'd forgotten its name, and Remy Santos was somewhere behind the curtain, 15 feet away, doing whatever flight attendants did in the galley at 1 a.m. over the Rockies. She pressed the call button. It was the single most reckless thing she'd done in recent memory, and she'd once closed a $60 million deal on a handshake with a man she'd later discovered was under SEC investigation. Remy appeared within 30 seconds. She moved through the dark cabin like she was made of it, silent, fluid, the blue glow of the emergency floor lighting catching the curve of her calves as she crouched beside 2A. You rang? Whispered. Her face was close. In the dark her eyes were black, pupils blown wide, and her berry lips were slightly parted, and Vivian could see the faint gleam of her teeth. I need, Vivian started. Stopped. What did she need? She needed this woman to stop looking at her like that. She needed to touch her. She needed to not need either of those things. She needed to be the kind of person who didn't lose herself over a flight attendant in a darkened airplane cabin, and she needed, with a desperation that frightened her, to stop being that person immediately. "I need assistance," she said. "What kind of assistance?" Vivian's hand moved before her brain could veto it. She caught Remy's wrist, the inside of it, where the skin was thin and warm, and she could feel the rapid-fire drumbeat of a pulse that told her everything she needed to know about whether this was one-sided. Remy looked down at Vivian's hand on her wrist. Then up. The air between them went solid. 2 minutes, Remy breathed. "After me." She stood. Walked toward the front lavatory, with the unhurried ease of someone performing a routine cabin check. Opened the door. Stepped inside. Closed it. The occupied sign glowed red in the dark. Vivian sat in her seat and counted. 1 Mississippi. 2 Mississippi. Her heart was slamming so hard she could feel it in her fingertips, in her throat, in the space behind her eyes. She was about to follow a woman she'd met twice into an airplane lavatory at 1 in the morning over Colorado, and the part of her brain responsible for risk assessment, the part that had built her career, her reputation, her entire identity, was screaming at her to stay in her seat, and every other part of her was already unbuckling the seatbelt. 45 Mississippi. 60 Mississippi. She stood up. The walk from 2A to the forward lavatory was 12 feet. It took 4 seconds. It felt like 40 minutes. She was aware of every detail, the hum of the engines, the soft snoring from 1A, the rough texture of the carpet under her stockinged feet. She'd slipped off her heels without deciding to, and the red glow of the occupied sign growing brighter as she approached. She knocked. Once. Barely audible. The door opened. A hand reached out, warm fingers closing around her wrist, and pulled her inside. The lavatory was tiny. Absurdly, comically tiny. 4 feet by 3 feet of fluorescent lit nothing, a steel sink, a mirror, a toilet she refused to acknowledge, and Remy, pressed against the door, eyes dark, chest rising and falling in a rhythm that had nothing to do with standard respiration. The door closed behind Vivian. Remy reached past her and slid the lock. The occupied sign clicked from red to, well, it was already red. They stood facing each other in the blue-white light, bodies nearly touching, the entire space vibrating with engine noise and intention. "We have about 8 minutes before someone notices I'm gone," Remy said. Her voice was steady, but her eyes were wild. "So if you're going to change your mind..." "I'm not." Remy's hands came up to Vivian's face. Both hands, palms against her jaw, fingers sliding into the hair at her temples, thumbs tracing the line of her cheekbones, a touch so deliberate and so possessive that Vivian's knees actually buckled, a full centimeter of structural failure she would deny until death. "Tell me to stop and I stop," Remy said. "If you stop, I will fire you." "You can't fire me. You don't work for the airline." "I'll buy the airline." Remy laughed, short, breathless, disbelieving, and kissed her. The first kiss was hard. Not tentative, not exploratory, not any of the polite negotiations a first kiss was supposed to be. It was acclaiming. Remy's mouth on hers, with the full authority of a woman who knew exactly what she wanted and had decided, somewhere between the galley and the lavatory door, to stop pretending otherwise. Vivian made a sound she'd never made before, a low, raw, desperate noise from the back of her throat that came from a place she didn't know she had, and Remy swallowed it. Her tongue swept Vivian's lower lip, and Vivian opened for her instantly, without thought, without the usual negotiation of her body's defenses. And the taste of her, mint and champagne and something underneath that was just Remy, sent a spike of heat from Vivian's mouth straight to the base of her spine. Her back hit the door. She hadn't realized she was moving, but Remy had been advancing. Small, deliberate steps that closed the negligible distance between them until they were pressed together, chest to chest, hip to hip, and Vivian could feel the heat of Remy's body through 2 layers of uniform and her own silk blouse, and it wasn't close to enough. Remy's hands moved from Vivian's face to her blouse. Efficient. She undid the top 3 buttons with the dexterity of someone who'd had practice with buttons, and Vivian had a flash of something that might have been jealousy. Who else, how many others, before Remy's mouth dropped to her collarbone and all thought left her body in a rush. God, you're gorgeous. Remy's lips moved against her skin, the words more vibration than sound. I've been thinking about this since the second you sat down in 2A. The first time. Not tonight, the first time. You've been thinking about, Vivian tried for coherent speech and achieved approximately 60%. You've been thinking about undressing me in an airplane bathroom for a week? Longer. Remy bit down gently on the curve where Vivian's neck met her shoulder. I've been thinking about this spot right here. Another bite, harder. And this one. Her tongue traced the line of Vivian's collarbone to the hollow of her throat. And I've been thinking about what you sound like when you stop being in control. I don't stop being in. Remy's hand slid under her skirt. Vivian's sentence died. Her eyes slammed shut. Remy's fingers traced up the inside of her thigh, over the silk of her stockings, past the lace of the thigh-highs, onto bare skin, and Vivian's hips jerked forward involuntarily, a betrayal by her own body so complete she would have been embarrassed if she'd had the cognitive capacity for embarrassment, which she did not, because Remy's fingers had reached the edge of her underwear and were tracing the elastic with a lightness that was specifically, deliberately cruel. Remy? We have 8 minutes. 7 now. I'm very efficient. Then be efficient. Remy grinned against her throat. Then she dropped to her knees. The visual alone, Remy Santos on her knees on the floor of an airplane lavatory, looking up at Vivian through dark lashes with an expression that was equal parts devotion and destruction, was enough to make Vivian grip the edge of the sink hard enough to turn her knuckles white. Remy pushed Vivian's skirt up to her waist, hooked her fingers into the waistband of her underwear, silk, black, expensive, and currently the most inconvenient garment ever manufactured, and pulled them down her thighs in one smooth motion. Sit, Remy said, nodding toward the sink counter. Vivian sat. The counter was cold under her bare thighs, and she didn't care. Remy positioned herself between Vivian's legs, one hand on each knee, spreading them wider, and looked up. You're shaking, she said. I'm not. You are. Remy turned her head and pressed her lips to the inside of Vivian's knee. Soft. Almost tender. It's okay. I've got you. I've got you. 3 words that shouldn't have meant anything, empty reassurance, standard comfort, but landed in Vivian's chest like a flare, illuminating something vast and dark she'd been standing at the edge of for 2 years. Then Remy's mouth moved up her inner thigh, slowly, wetly, each kiss a little higher, a little firmer, and Vivian stopped thinking about metaphors and started thinking about nothing at all. The first touch of Remy's tongue was devastating. There was no other word for it. Not gentle, not tentative, devastating. A long, flat stroke from bottom to top that made Vivian's entire body convulse and her hand fly to her own mouth to muffle the sound that ripped out of her. A sound that belonged in a bedroom with thick walls and no neighbors, not in a lavatory at 37,000 feet with 200 sleeping passengers on the other side of a folding door. Remy made a low, satisfied noise against her, the hum of a woman who'd just gotten exactly what she wanted, and settled in like she had all night. She didn't. She had 6 minutes. But her mouth moved with the unhurried confidence of someone who had turned this particular act into an art form, reading Vivian's responses with the fluency of a native speaker. When Vivian's hips canted forward, Remy followed. When Vivian's thighs tensed, Remy eased the pressure, teased the edges, circled without giving contact where it was needed. When Vivian whimpered, a sound she would later deny with the ferocity of someone protecting state secrets, Remy rewarded her with a focused, relentless rhythm that made Vivian see white. Fuck. The word escaped between her fingers. She was gripping the sink edge with one hand and pressing the other over her mouth, and neither was sufficient. The counter was slippery and her hand wasn't big enough to contain the sounds Remy was pulling out of her like thread from a spool. Remy's hands gripped Vivian's thighs, holding her open, holding her steady. Her tongue worked with devastating precision, alternating pressure and speed, reading every twitch and gasp and involuntary roll of Vivian's hips like data points in a model she'd already solved. The orgasm built like a wave, a deep rolling pressure that started at the base of Vivian's spine and climbed. Her free hand found Remy's hair. She pulled hard, harder than she meant to, and the bun came apart, dark waves spilling over Remy's shoulders, and the visual of it, Remy with her hair down, lips glistening, looking up at her with eyes that were black with want, tipped Vivian over the edge. She came with the plane shuddering through a cloud bank, her hand clamped over her mouth, her teeth sinking into the flesh of her palm, her entire body arching off the counter in a spasm she couldn't have controlled if she'd wanted to. The orgasm rolled through her in waves, 1, 2, 3, each one pulling a sound from her throat that her palm barely contained. Remy didn't stop. She eased the pressure but kept going, gentler, slower, guiding Vivian through the aftershocks with the same steady patience she'd used to talk her through the panic attack, and the paralleling of those two moments, "breathe with me, I've got you," made Vivian's eyes sting in a way that had nothing to do with the fluorescent lighting. When it was over, when the last tremor had passed and Vivian's breathing had downgraded from cardiac event to merely wrecked, Remy stood. Her lips were swollen, her hair was a disaster, and she was grinning with the satisfied radiance of someone who'd just completed a masterwork. "See," she said, her voice rough. "Turbulence." Vivian pulled her in by the lapels of her blazer and kissed her. Tasted herself on Remy's tongue and felt a jolt of something primal, possessive, and entirely new. Her hand dropped between them, reaching for the waistband of Remy's skirt, fingers working the zipper. Remy caught her wrist. "Not now." "But." "My turn later." Remy pressed a kiss to the corner of Vivian's mouth. "Soft." "A promise. I want more than 6 minutes for what I have planned for you." Vivian's brain short-circuited at "what I have planned for you," and by the time she'd recovered the capacity for speech, Remy was already fixing her bun in the mirror, dark hair twisted up with practice speed, bobby pins materializing from somewhere, uniform smoothed, lipstick reapplied from a tube she produced from her blazer pocket. The transformation took 45 seconds. She went from ravished to ready for service with an efficiency that was, frankly, terrifying. "I'll go first," Remy said, hand on the lock. She glanced back. "Wait 90 seconds. "Remy." Vivian was sitting on the counter of an airplane lavatory with her skirt around her waist and her underwear somewhere near her ankle, and her lipstick smeared across her face, and her hands still shaking, and her heart trying to crack through her sternum, and she looked at this woman, this absurd, beautiful, impossible woman, and said the only thing she could think of. "I don't do this." Remy's expression softened. The performance fell away, the flirt, the confidence, the easy smile, and what was left was something unguarded and fragile and real. "I know," she said. "Neither do I." She unlocked the door, slipped out, and was gone. Vivian sat alone in the lavatory for 90 seconds that felt like 90 years. She looked at herself in the mirror, flushed, disheveled, mouth swollen, eyes glassy, a bite mark blooming on her collarbone that her blouse would not cover, and did not recognize the woman looking back. That woman was messy. That woman was undone. That woman had let a stranger take her apart in an airplane bathroom, and had liked it so much, her hands were still trembling 3 minutes later. That woman looked alive. Vivian buttoned her blouse, straightened her skirt, ran her fingers through her hair, left the lavatory and walked back to 2A on legs that functioned through willpower alone. She sat down, buckled in, pulled the blanket up, stared at the seat back. From the galley, she could hear the soft clink of service preparations, Remy back at work as if nothing had happened. As if the last 8 minutes had been a shared hallucination. Vivian looked down at her palm, at the crescent-shaped marks her own teeth had left, and pressed her thumb into them until they stung. Not a hallucination. She stared at the seatback for 20 minutes without blinking. Her body was still humming, a low residual vibration like the aftershock of an earthquake, everything slightly shifted from where it had been before. Between her legs, she was still wet, still swollen, still pulsing with the fading echo of an orgasm that had rewritten her understanding of what her body was capable of feeling. She thought about her mother. Not the death, not Singapore, not the hospital, but before. The last time they'd talked on the phone. Linda had said, "Vivian, honey, when was the last time you let someone surprise you?" She hadn't had an answer then. She did now. The plane began its descent into JFK. The cabin lights came up. Passengers stirred. The captain announced the local time, the temperature, the standard request to remain seated until the seatbelt sign was turned off. Vivian deplaned without looking at Remy. She couldn't. If she looked at her, if she saw the dimple, the gloss, the knowing curve of that mouth, she would do something catastrophic, like kiss her at the aircraft door in front of God and the ground crew and every Diamond Elite passenger who'd ever booked a first-class ticket. She walked up the jet bridge on legs that were not entirely steady and emerged into JFK Terminal 4 at dawn for the second time in 10 days, and the world looked exactly the same and entirely different. In the taxi to Manhattan, she took out her phone. Found the number she'd memorized but never dialed. Typed with thumbs that were still trembling. "This is Vivian. From the flight." That was. "I don't normally do that." She stared at the message. Deleted the ellipsis. Added a period. Deleted the period. Added the ellipsis back. Pressed send before she could perform any further punctuation forensics. 3 dots appeared immediately. Remy was typing. Vivian held the phone with both hands and watched those 3 dots pulse like a heartbeat, and felt for the first time in 2 years like she might be willing to stop running long enough to see what happened when she stood still. The reply arrived. "I know you don't. That's what made it so good." And then, a second later. "When do you fly again?" Vivian looked out the taxi window at Queens sliding past in the early light, diners opening, bodegas lit, the city waking up with the particular energy of a place that never fully slept, and typed back. "Thursday. LAX to London." The 3 dots pulsed. Stopped. Started again. "I'm working the Thursday LHR flight." Vivian's reflections stared back at her from the taxi window. A woman in a wrinkled blazer with a bite mark on her neck and a smile she was failing to suppress. "What a coincidence," she typed. "Isn't it? I'll save you the good champagne." Vivian locked her phone, pressed it against her chest, and let the smile win. Chapter 4. Crew Rest. Remy Santos had done a lot of questionable things in airplane lavatories. She'd changed out of a wine-stained uniform into a backup skirt at Mach 0.85 over the Atlantic. She'd performed first aid on a man who'd sliced his thumb open trying to pry apart a frozen bread roll. She'd once held a woman's hair back while she vomited champagne and shrimp cocktail during a particularly vindictive patch of turbulence over Greenland, and she'd done it without breaking eye contact or her smile because that was the job and she was exceptional at the job. But she had never, not once, not ever, in 7 years and 4,000 flights, gone down on a passenger on the bathroom sink at cruising altitude while the rest of first class slept 12 feet away. There was a first time for everything apparently, and Vivian Lane's thighs trembling against her ears was one hell of a way to inaugurate the tradition. She stood at the aircraft door during deplaning, delivering her standard goodbye with a face that betrayed absolutely nothing, while inside her body every cell was conducting a postmortem of the last 8 minutes. Her lips were still swollen. She could still taste Vivian, sharp and clean and faintly like the gin she drank, and the sense memory of it hit her in rolling waves that made maintaining professional composure an act of genuine heroism. She'd pressed the napkin into Vivian's hand. She'd watched her walk up the jet bridge without looking back, that rigid spine, those deliberate strides, the careful not looking that was more revealing than any glance. The woman was in full retreat, walls going up in real time, and Remy recognized the pattern because she'd invented it. The difference was that Remy retreated with a shrug and a smile and a, "That was fun, see you never." Vivian retreated like she was sealing a blast door, against a nuclear event. The last passenger shuffled past. The cabin emptied. Remy slumped against the doorframe and let out a breath she'd been holding since approximately the moment Vivian's hand had found her hair and pulled. So, Donnie materialized from economy like an apparition of judgment. Arms crossed, blonde bob immaculate despite 6 hours of wrangling 180 economy passengers and one incontinent Pomeranian. So, Remy said. You were gone 12 minutes. 11. 12. I timed it. Donnie leaned against the opposite side of the doorframe, mirroring Remy's posture with the practiced symmetry of a woman who'd been reading her for 4 years. And you came back looking like you just, she stopped. Tilted her head. Oh my God. What? Your lipstick's different. I reapplied. You reapplied because it was gone. Remy Santos. Did you just, in the lavatory, with the Ice Queen in 2A? I performed a routine cabin check. A routine cabin check. With your mouth. Remy straightened and began collecting headrest covers with a focus that suggested the headrest covers were critical to national security. I don't know what you're implying. I'm not implying anything. I'm stating explicitly and for the record that you disappeared into the forward lav for 12 minutes while the hottest woman on this aircraft was coincidentally not in her seat, and you came back with reapplied lipstick and a hickey on your neck that you haven't noticed yet. Remy's hand flew to her neck. She caught Danny's grin, wide, delighted, the grin of a woman holding a winning hand, and realized she'd been played. There's no hickey, she said. No. But that reaction told me everything I needed to know. Donnie plucked a blanket from 3C and folded it with military precision. So, scale of 1 to Reykjavik. How bad is it? Remy didn't answer immediately. She stripped the last headrest cover, balled it between her hands, and stared at the crumpled fabric like it contained the answer to a question she wasn't ready to ask. It's not Reykjavik, she said finally. Portland? It's not Portland either. Donnie stopped folding. The playfulness drained from her expression, replaced by something Remy rarely saw there, genuine concern. Remy. It's different, Donnie. Different how? Remy opened her mouth. Closed it. Tried again. She had a panic attack on the first flight. Last week. Turbulence, she just fell apart. And I held her hand and talked her through it, and when it was over she looked at me like, she broke off. Like no one had ever caught her before. Like she didn't know people did that. Donnie was quiet for a moment. And tonight she looked at me the same way. Except we were in a bathroom, and I was on my knees. The silence that followed was heavy with things unsaid. Donnie studied her with an expression Remy had learned to dread, the one that preceded the kind of honest, loving, surgically precise observations that best friends delivered when they saw you walking toward a cliff and loved you enough to describe exactly how far the drop was. Come on, Donnie said, picking up the blanket bag. Crew van's in 10. You can tell me the rest over bad hotel wine. They didn't talk about it in the crew van. Protocol. You didn't discuss passengers within earshot of other crew, and the van was full. Captain Reeves, who was half asleep, Maria from economy, who was fully asleep, and Todd from the flight deck, who was the kind of man who'd file a report about his own grandmother if he thought it would get him a commendation. The JFK Crew Hotel was the same Holiday Inn Express from last week. Same industrial carpet. Same fluorescent lobby. Same desk clerk, who looked like he'd seen the entire human condition pass through his lobby at 6 a.m. and had developed a comprehensive theory about why none of it mattered. Remy got her room key, 408 this time, same floor, different view of the parking lot, and texted Donnie, my room 20 minutes, bring the wine. She showered first. Stood under the water, marginally better pressure than last time, still nothing to celebrate, and let the heat work the tension out of her shoulders while the rest of her body catalogued, with excruciating precision, every detail of what had happened in that lavatory. The way Vivian's thighs had tightened around her head when she got close. The way her breath had caught, a sharp, shocked intake, like she'd been jolted awake from a long sleep. The way she'd said Remy in a voice stripped of every layer of corporate polish, just her name, raw and desperate, like it was the only word she had left. The way she'd pulled Remy's hair and the bun had come apart, and Vivian's eyes had gone wide at the sight of her with her hair down and her mouth full of her, and Remy had looked up and seen something crack behind those ice blue eyes, not the control breaking, but the wall behind the control, the deeper wall, the one that kept everything in, and for one unguarded second Vivian Lane had looked like a woman who had just been touched for the first time in her life. She hadn't been, obviously. But she'd been touched for the first time by Remy, and apparently Remy's ego couldn't distinguish between the two, and apparently her heart couldn't either. She turned off the water and pressed her forehead against the tile. "You're in trouble." The water dripped. The pipes groaned. Somewhere on another floor, someone's alarm was going off, and no one was silencing it. "You're in so much fucking trouble." She toweled off, pulled on an oversized tee and underwear, her standard crew hotel uniform, and was combing her wet hair when her phone buzzed on the bathroom counter. Unknown number. New York area code. "This is Vivian. From the flight." That was. "I don't normally do that." Remy stared at the screen. She stared at it long enough for the screen to go dark. She picked it up again, and the words were still there, and something in her chest expanded until it pressed against her ribs. Vivian had texted. The woman who'd walked up the jet bridge without looking back, the woman who wore her composure like body armor, the woman who'd said, "I don't do this," with the stricken expression of someone watching their own house burn down, she texted. Voluntarily. Using her fingers and a phone and presumably her brain, which meant some part of that formidable brain had decided that Remy Santos was worth a breach of protocol. Donnie knocked on the door. Remy opened it with her phone clutched to her chest like a teenager. "What?" Donnie said, holding a bottle of gas station Pinot Grigio and 2 plastic cups. Then she saw Remy's face. "Oh, for fuck's sake." She texted. Remy held up the phone. Donnie read the message, closed her eyes, and poured the wine with the deliberate calm of someone administering last rites. "She said she doesn't normally do that," Donnie said, handing Remy a cup. "She doesn't." "You don't know that." "I know that." Remy sat on the bed cross-legged, phone in one hand, wine in the other. "You didn't see her, Donnie." During the panic attack, she was mortified. Like losing control was the worst thing that had ever happened to her. And tonight in the lav, she stopped. Took a drink. She looked at me like I'd taken something from her. Not in a bad way. She didn't know she had it to give. She didn't know it was there. Donnie sat on the opposite bed, shoes off, legs tucked under her. "That's a lot of character analysis for someone you've been inside of once." "I wasn't inside her, I was." "Your mouth." "Her body." "Functionally inside." Remy conceded the point with a sip of truly terrible wine. "What do I say back?" "You say that was fun, take care, have a nice life." And then you block the number and never fly her route again. Donnie. "I'm serious, Remy." Donnie set her cup down on the nightstand with a precision that indicated the conversation had shifted from banter to briefing. "She's a passenger. A Diamond Elite passenger who flies your routes regularly, which means every time she's on your plane it's a fraternization risk." Wendy Cho. Wendy Cho was sleeping with a married man who filed a complaint when she ended it. That's not this. The policy doesn't care about context. The policy cares about optics. And the optics of a flight attendant fucking a frequent flyer in the forward lav are not great, babe. First of all, she didn't. I was the one who. Remy stopped. This is not a deposition. It might become one. Donnie softened. She always softened. The sarcasm was the crust, but underneath was a woman who'd once driven 4 hours to pick Remy up from a bad date in Sacramento without being asked. "Look. I love you. You know I love you. But I've watched you do this. Not this exactly, you've never been this stupid before, which is actually what worries me, but the pattern. You meet someone, you get swept up, you burn hot for a week or a month, and then one of you has to be somewhere else and it fades and you're fine because you were never really in it. You kept one foot on the jet bridge the whole time. Remy looked at her wine. Said nothing. This one's different, Donnie said. Not a question. This one's different. Because of the panic attack? Because of everything. Because she drinks gin neat and works like she's trying to outrun something, and her hands were cold, Donnie. Her hands were so cold when I held them during the turbulence, and then in the bathroom they were cold again until she stopped. Pressed the plastic cup against her own forehead. I sound insane. You sound like someone catching feelings. I don't catch feelings. Babe. Danny's voice was so gentle it hurt. You caught them, brought them home, and named them. The phone was still in Remy's hand. Vivian's message on the screen. 7 sentences. Formal. Apologetic. The digital equivalent of that squared spine walking up the jet bridge, retreating into propriety even while reaching out. This is Vivian. From the flight. That was. I don't normally do that. Remy typed back, I know you don't. That's what made it so good. Sent it before Donnie could object. Donnie read the screen over her shoulder and made a noise like a woman watching a car crash in slow motion. Horrified, fascinated, unable to look away. The 3 dots appeared. Vivian was typing. The 3 dots disappeared. Appeared again. Vivian Lane, who probably drafted client emails in her sleep, was struggling with a text message, and Remy found this so endearing she wanted to scream. No reply came. The dots vanished. Remy waited. Sipped the awful wine. Waited more. Then, 20 minutes later, while Donnie was in the bathroom brushing her teeth, the phone buzzed. You're annoyingly confident for someone who just committed a federal aviation violation. Remy laughed. Actually laughed, a sound that startled Donnie into opening the bathroom door with a toothbrush hanging out of her mouth. I think the FAA has bigger concerns than my extracurricular service, Remy typed back. I'd like to file a formal complaint about the service actually. It was too short. Remy's whole body flushed. She was grinning at her phone like an idiot, sitting cross-legged on a Holiday Inn Express bed in a $10 t-shirt with wet hair and bad wine, and she was happy. Not the fizzy, surface-level happy of a good layover hookup. The deep, terrifying, structural kind of happy that suggested something load-bearing had shifted. Next time, I'll make sure there are no time constraints, she typed. Next time? Are you pretending there won't be a next time, Vivian? A long pause. Then, I'm pretending I haven't already thought about it 4 times since I got in this taxi. Remy pressed the phone against her mouth and closed her eyes. Donnie, standing in the bathroom doorway, watched her with the weary love of a woman who'd already started drafting the I told you so speech and the I'll bring ice cream backup plan. 4 times in one taxi ride, Remy typed. I'm flattered. Don't be. I'm a very efficient thinker. What did you think about? Another pause. Longer. Remy could picture Vivian in the back of a Manhattan taxi, composing and deleting, the blue light of her phone screen, catching those cheekbones, that jaw, the bite mark Remy had left on her collarbone that was probably already blooming into something visible above her blouse. I thought about your hands on my knees. The way you spread them like you were opening a book you'd been waiting to read. Remy's breath caught. She read the message twice. 3 times. I thought about the sound you made, Vivian continued, when you first tasted me. Like you'd been hungry. I can't stop hearing it. Jesus Christ, Remy whispered to the empty room. Donnie had retreated to her own room at some point, Remy hadn't noticed when, and she was alone with her phone and the heat climbing up her neck and the realization that Vivian Lane, Ice Queen, gin-drinking corporate automaton, was sexting her from a taxi. I was hungry, Remy typed. Her thumbs were unsteady. I've been hungry since the first flight. Since you looked at me like I was something you couldn't afford to want. You're not something I can afford. And yet. The conversation shifted, not deliberately but the way water finds lower ground. One message led to another, the flirtation thickening, each text a little braver than the last. Remy told Vivian about the things she'd noticed, the way Vivian's composure fractured in stages, like watching ice crack, each fissure revealing something warmer underneath. Vivian told Remy about the napkin, how she'd kept it in her wallet for a week, behind her Amex Black, and had taken it out every night and put it back every morning and felt ridiculous about both. They talked about other things too. The non-sex things that shouldn't have mattered but did. Vivian's obsession with hotel thread counts. Remy's Moroccan rug from Marrakesh. The fact that they'd both spent more nights in hotel rooms than in their own beds, and had both made peace with it, and were both, possibly, lying about the peace part. At midnight, 2 a.m. New York time, but Remy's body clock was a wreck and clocks were a suggestion. Vivian typed, "When do you fly next?" Thursday. LAXLHR. A pause that lasted 37 seconds. Remy counted. "I have a London meeting Friday." What a coincidence. Isn't it? Remy set the phone down. Stared at the water-stained ceiling. Picked the phone back up. "My hotel in London is a Holiday Inn near Heathrow that smells like carpet cleaner and regret," she typed. "Just so you know what you're getting into." "Room number?" "I'll text you when I land." "I'll be there." Remy locked the phone. Set it on the nightstand. Pulled the hotel comforter up to her chin and lay in the dark, listening to the distant rush of aircraft on approach to JFK, that specific sound that had been the backdrop of her entire adult life, the sound of other people going somewhere and her always being in between. She thought about Vivian's text, "Like you were opening a book you'd been waiting to read." She thought about the warmth of Vivian's thighs, and the cold of her hands, and the way her voice had broken on Remy's name in that tiny, absurd bathroom, cracking open like something that had been sealed too long and too tight. She thought about Danny's warning, "You caught them, brought them home, and named them." She thought about the fraternization policy. The anonymous tip line. Wendy Cho's termination letter, which had circulated among the crew like a cautionary fable. She thought about her job, her wings, her sky, the only freedom she'd ever known, and weighed it against the feeling in her chest when Vivian Lane typed, "I'll be there," like it was the simplest thing in the world. The math didn't work. The risk was stupid. The logistics were insane. Two women whose lives were built around departure, trying to build something that required arrival. Remy reached for her phone one more time. Opened the message thread. Typed 4 words she had no business typing, words that were either the beginning of something extraordinary or the first step off a cliff she couldn't see the bottom of. "I can't wait, Vivian." The reply came in 11 seconds. "Neither can I." She fell asleep smiling, which was not something she did in crew hotels or anywhere or ever, and when her alarm went off 6 hours later for the shuttle back to the airport, the smile was still there, stubborn, reckless, and completely beyond her control. She had a text from Donnie, "You're smiling in your sleep. I can hear it through the wall. I'm concerned." And a text from Vivian, sent at 4:17 a.m., "For the record, I counted. It was 6 times, not 4. The taxi, the hotel lobby, the elevator, the shower, and twice in bed. You're becoming a problem, Remy Santos." Remy laughed in the empty hotel room, pressed the phone against her chest, and thought, "Yeah. You too, Tue. You too." Chapter 5. London Calling. Vivian booked the ticket on a Tuesday. She did it from her desk at the firm's Century City office, the corner office she occupied maybe 40 days a year, with the view of the Avenue of the Stars she'd spent 11 years climbing toward, and the ergonomic chair she'd never adjusted because she was never in it long enough to develop a preference. She opened the airline portal, navigated to the Thursday LAX LHR red-eye, selected first class with her own credit card instead of the corporate account, and completed the purchase in 90 seconds. Then she sat back, looked at the confirmation email, and acknowledged privately, silently, with the clinical honesty she reserved for moments of genuine self-assessment, that she had just spent $8,400 on a plane ticket she didn't need because a flight attendant was working the route. She had a London meeting. That part was real. The Meridian Hotel's European portfolio review that James wanted her to lead, the one she'd been positioning for, the one that lived on the partnership track roadmap she'd been following since her first year as an associate. But the meeting was Friday afternoon. She could have flown Thursday morning. She could have taken the company booking on any number of carriers. She could have done what she always did: optimize for efficiency, minimize for cost, and treat air travel as the necessary connective tissue between billable engagements. Instead, she'd chosen a red-eye that departed at 9:30 p.m. specifically because R. Santos was on the crew manifest, and she'd paid for first class with her own money specifically because she wanted to sit in a cabin where Remy would be serving, and she was doing all of this specifically because she'd spent the last 4 nights lying in her Brentwood condo staring at the ceiling and replaying the text exchange, "You're becoming a problem, Remy Santos," and the 6 specific fantasies she'd confessed to and the 11 she hadn't, and the rational part of her brain had lost the vote. It wasn't a close vote. She closed the laptop, walked to the window, and pressed her forehead against the glass. 23 floors below, Los Angeles shimmered in the afternoon haze, cars on the 405 crawling like blood cells through a clogged artery, palm trees lining the boulevard with their particular brand of decorative uselessness, the whole sprawling, sun-bleached machinery of a city that ran on ambition and self-deception. She was deceiving herself. She knew she was deceiving herself. The London meeting was a pretext. The flight was the point. The woman on the flight was the point. And Vivian Lane, who had spent 36 years constructing an identity built on the absolute primacy of reason over impulse, had just made an $8,400 impulse purchase because a woman with a dimple had eaten her out in a lavatory and she couldn't stop thinking about it. Her phone buzzed. Remy. They'd been texting every day since the flight. Not constantly, Remy was flying, Vivian was in meetings, but with a rhythm that had established itself organically, the way a heartbeat finds its resting rate. Morning texts. Remy sent photos of sunrises from whatever city she'd woken up in. Vivian replied with dry commentary about the aesthetic choices of her hotel room. Midday check-ins, brief, warm, the conversational equivalent of reaching across a table and squeezing someone's hand. Late-night exchanges, longer, slower, the kind of unguarded rambling that happened when defenses were low and loneliness was high. They hadn't talked about the lavatory again. Not directly. It existed in their text thread as a gravitational center. Everything orbited it, nothing touched it, and the avoidance was its own form of foreplay. A sustained tension that hummed beneath every innocuous message like a bass note too low to hear but impossible not to feel. Until last night. Last night, at 11:47 p.m., Remy had sent a photo. Not explicit, nothing that would have qualified as inappropriate if intercepted, just a shot of herself in a hotel mirror, fresh from a shower, hair down and damp, wearing an oversized white tee that stopped mid-thigh, bare legs, no makeup. Her eyes were soft and dark and looking directly into the camera with an expression that was not smiling and not smiling, and was, in its quiet, unperformed intimacy, the sexiest thing Vivian had ever seen on a screen. "This is what I look like when I'm not working," the caption read. In case you were curious. Vivian had been sitting in bed reading a financial report on European hotel occupancy rates, actual work, actual preparation for the London meeting, and the photo had obliterated her concentration so completely she'd had to set the report down and take several breaths of the kind that Dr. Mehta would have recognized as a grounding exercise. "I was curious," she typed back. "I'm more curious now." About what? About what that shirt looks like on the floor. She'd sent it and immediately wanted to throw her phone into the Pacific Ocean. Vivian Lane did not sext. Vivian Lane did not flirt via text message. Vivian Lane composed emails that were marvels of professional precision and communicated her personal feelings through a combination of eye contact, strategic silence, and the occasional well-timed raising of a single eyebrow. And yet, Remy's reply had been 3 words: Thursday. Find out. Vivian had not slept well. Now it was Thursday. She was standing in the LAX International Terminal at 8:45 p.m. with her carry-on packed, her boarding pass loaded, and her pulse doing something her Garmin would have categorized as moderate cardiovascular exertion, despite the fact that she was standing completely still. The terminal was its usual controlled chaos. Families with too many bags, businessmen with too few manners, the pervasive hum of announcements and escalators, and the particular anxiety of international departure, which was different from domestic departure in the same way that jumping off a diving board was different from jumping off a cliff. Same action, different stakes. She stopped at the duty-free and bought a bottle of champagne. Cru Clos du Mesnil, $250, because she'd told Remy she didn't drink champagne and because showing up with champagne was, in Vivian's emotional vocabulary, the equivalent of a handwritten love letter, an extravagant contradiction of her own stated position that communicated more clearly than words, "You've changed something in me, and I don't know how to say it, so I'm buying expensive things instead." She also bought a new lipstick. Berry. The same shade Remy wore. She put it on in the duty-free mirror and didn't recognize her own mouth. Boarding began at 9:05. She joined the first-class queue, 5 people ahead of her, all men, all in suits, all exuding the particular confidence of people who flew internationally in the front of the plane and considered it their birthright. She was one of them. She'd been one of them for years. Tonight she didn't feel like one of them. Tonight she felt like a woman wearing a new lipstick, carrying a bottle of champagne to a flight she'd booked for a reason that had nothing to do with work, and the disconnect between her professional self and this new, reckless, wanting self was vertiginous. She boarded, turned left into first class. And there she was. Remy was at the galley entrance, tray in hand, mid-conversation with another crew member. She was in uniform, the fitted skirt, the blazer nipped at the waist, the heels, and her hair was in the bun and the lipstick was fresh, and she looked exactly the same as the first 2 times and entirely different, because Vivian now knew what she looked like on her knees, and what her hair looked like when it came down, and what sound she made when she tasted someone for the first time. Their eyes met. Remy's professionalism held. No visible reaction, no widened eyes, no smile, no break in the conversation. But something shifted in her posture, a micro-adjustment, a squaring of the shoulders, a slight lift of the chin, and her gaze didn't so much land on Vivian as lock on, with the precision of a heat-seeking system that had found its target and was not letting go. "Welcome aboard, Ms. Lane." Smooth. Professional. The voice she used for every Diamond Elite passenger. But her eyes said Thursday. Find out. Thank you. Vivian walked to 2A. Their seat. It was absurd to think of it as their seat after 2 flights, but her brain had decided, and she wasn't going to argue with it tonight. She stowed her bag, sat down, buckled the seatbelt, placed the duty-free bag with the champagne on the seat beside her. 1A was empty tonight, and 3C had a middle-aged woman who was already asleep under an eye mask. 4 passengers in first. Maximum privacy. Remy arrived for pre-departure service. This time, she didn't offer champagne. She looked at the duty-free bag, clocked the Krug label through the plastic, and raised one eyebrow, the left one, a move Vivian recognized as her own signature gesture being used against her. "I thought you didn't drink champagne," Remy said. "I don't. That's for my hotel room." "Alone?" "That depends on whether anyone's interested in sharing." Remy's mouth did something, a compression, a suppression, and Vivian realized she was fighting a smile. A real one. The kind that came from the chest and threatened the eyes, and had to be physically restrained in a professional setting. "I'll bring your gin," Remy said, and walked away with a hip sway that should have had its own boarding pass. The flight was 10 hours and 42 minutes. Vivian experienced them as follows. Hour 1, takeoff. Departure over the Pacific, the banked left turn that swept the cabin with LA's light grid before pointing them east toward the dark continent of Middle America. Jin arrived. Remy's fingers on the glass, exactly the same as before, the deliberate brush, the half-second of contact that sent electricity up Vivian's arm. Dinner service. Remy leaned across to place the breadbasket, same as before, but this time she paused, mid-lean, breasts at Vivian's eye level, close enough that Vivian could see the pulse point in her throat, and murmured, "I like the lipstick." "New shade?" "New everything," Vivian said, and meant it in ways she wasn't prepared to unpack. Hour 2, cabin lights dimmed. Red-eye protocol. The other passengers disappeared into their pods, shades drawn, blankets up, the gentle orchestration of collective unconsciousness. Vivian sat in the dark with her reading light off and her laptop closed, and listened to the engine noise and her own heartbeat, and couldn't tell which was louder. Remy passed through on a cabin check. Their eyes met in the dark. Remy's hand trailed along the headrest of 2A as she passed, a touch so light it could have been accidental, fingertips barely grazing the leather, except that her fingers dipped lower and brushed the back of Vivian's neck, a whisper of contact that was there and gone in under a second and left a trail of heat that cascaded down Vivian's spine like a lit fuse. Hour 3, Vivian gave up pretending to sleep. She took out her phone, airplane mode, no Wi-Fi purchase, just the Notes app, and started writing. Not a report. Not a presentation. Not anything she would have recognized as a productive use of her time. She wrote about the napkin. About keeping it in her wallet for a week. About the lavatory, not the physical details which were seared into her sensory memory with the permanence of a brand, but the emotional ones. The moment Remy said, "I've got you." The way those 3 words had cracked something in her chest that she'd spent 2 years sealing shut. The realization, mid-orgasm at 37,000 feet, that she hadn't been touched by another person, not sexually, not tenderly, not at all, in over a year, and that the drought had been so complete she'd forgotten what it felt like to be wanted, and remembering it had hurt as much as the pleasure. She wrote about her mother. About the carrot cake. About the phone call from Singapore and the flight home that arrived too late, and the specific searing guilt of choosing a client presentation over a deathbed. She wrote, "I'm on a plane to London because a woman asked me to be, and I don't know who I am when I'm the kind of person who does that." She deleted all of it. Then sat in the dark, phone black on her lap, and breathed. Hour 4, Remy appeared at the edge of her row. Crouching. The same position as the panic attack, the same closeness, but the context had shifted so dramatically it might as well have been a different universe. "Can't sleep?" Whispered. Her face was underlit by the floor track lighting, shadows in the hollows of her cheeks, her eyes impossibly dark. "No." "Neither can I." Remy glanced toward the galley, then back. "Danny's covering for me. I have a few minutes." "A few minutes for what?" Remy didn't answer with words. She reached up and adjusted Vivian's blanket, the same gesture as before, hands smoothing cashmere over Vivian's lap, except this time her hand slid under the blanket and came to rest on Vivian's thigh. Vivian stopped breathing. Remy's hand was warm through the fabric of her trousers. Her fingers curled inward, a gentle squeeze, possessive and unhurried, and her thumb traced a slow arc along the inside of Vivian's leg that made every muscle in Vivian's body tighten simultaneously. "I've been thinking about you for 4 days, Remy whispered. Her hand moved higher. "Every night in a different hotel room. Every night alone. Do you know what that's like? Knowing what you taste like, and not being able to?" "Remy." Vivian's voice was barely air. "There are people. Everyone's asleep." I checked. Her hand was at the junction of Vivian's thigh now, fingertips pressing inward, the heat of her palm radiating through wool and silk. "I'm not going to do anything. Not here. She paused. Swallowed. And for the first time, the confident facade flickered, and Vivian saw something beneath it that was raw and young and scared. "I just wanted to touch you. I've been thinking about touching you for 4 days, and I just needed? Vivian kissed her. It wasn't smart. It wasn't safe. It was a dark cabin at 3 in the morning over the mid-Atlantic, and she leaned down and caught Remy's mouth mid-sentence and kissed her with a softness she didn't know she possessed. Slow, careful, the opposite of the lavatory's urgency. A kiss that was less about want and more about something she didn't have a word for yet. Something that felt like recognition. Like finding a room she'd forgotten existed in a house she'd been living in for years. Remy made a sound against her mouth, a small, surprised, yielding sound, and her hand tightened on Vivian's thigh, and for a moment they existed in a pocket of stillness inside the roaring machine of the aircraft, two women touching in the dark while the Atlantic scrolled below them at 500 miles per hour. Vivian pulled back first. She had to. If she didn't, she was going to pull Remy into the seat with her, and to hell with the sleeping passengers and the fraternization policy and the laws of physics that governed the width of a first-class flatbed. London, she breathed. Remy's eyes were glassy. Her lips were parted. She looked like she'd been hit by something. London, she echoed. Your hotel. Room 412. Crew Hotel. Holiday Inn. It's terrible. I don't care about the room. Remy stared at her. Then she pulled Vivian's hand from where it had found its way to the back of her neck, pressed her lips to the center of Vivian's palm, a kiss so gentle it barely qualified as contact, and stood. 6 more hours, she said. I know. Try to sleep. I won't. Remy's dimple appeared, barely a ghost in the dark. No. I won't either. She walked back to the galley. Vivian pressed her palm, the one Remy had kissed, against her own sternum and felt her heart hammering beneath it. Hours 5 through 8, a masterclass in sustained agony. Remy served the mid-flight snack, a warm cookie and milk, which was absurd and charming and which Vivian ate without tasting. Remy refreshed drinks. Vivian had switched to water. She wanted to be sober for whatever was coming. Remy conducted 3 more cabin checks, each one passing 2A with that same electric proximity, close enough to touch, never quite touching, and each one leaving Vivian's skin buzzing like a struck tuning fork. At hour 6, Remy left a note on the tray table with the water refill. Folded once. Hotel stationery, she'd brought it from the Holiday Inn. Room 412. I'll leave the door unlocked. Come whenever you're ready. P.S. I thought about you in the shower this morning. I'll tell you about it when you get there. Vivian read it twice. Folded it into her blazer pocket, beside the original napkin. Sat back. Stared at the ceiling of the aircraft and tried to calculate the remaining flight time in minutes, then seconds, then heartbeats, because her brain needed a mathematical framework for the anticipation or it was going to short-circuit. 312 minutes. 18,720 seconds. Approximately 14,000 heartbeats, at her current elevated rate. She was going to die. She was going to die of anticipation in a first-class seat over the North Atlantic, and the coroner's report would read cause of death, delayed gratification, and James Whitfield would deliver the eulogy and say she'd been a fine consultant but could have billed more hours, and Remy Santos would wear black to the funeral and look devastating in it. Hour 9, pre-arrival service. Lights coming up. Hot towels. Breakfast. The mundane choreography of a plane full of people preparing to be somewhere, which was its own kind of magic if you thought about it, the collective transition from suspended to grounded. Remy brought breakfast. Their last interaction in the professional context. She set the tray down with her usual efficiency, and when she straightened, she held Vivian's gaze and said quietly beneath the general noise of the waking cabin, "I'll be there by noon." After crew debrief. "I'll be there by 11. Remy's eyes flickered. 11's early. I don't want to waste time. Something passed between them, an acknowledgement, a promise, an understanding that whatever happened in room 412 was going to be different from the lavatory. Not faster. Not stolen. Not crammed into 8 minutes between cabin checks. This was going to be deliberate. 11, Remy said, and walked away. Hour 10, descent into Heathrow. The grey sprawl of London materializing through cloud cover, the Thames curving silver through the city, the clustered spires of Parliament, the Shard catching the morning light, the M25 circling everything like a concrete moat. Vivian watched it approach through the window and felt, for the first time in her traveling life, like she was arriving somewhere instead of just landing. She deplaned without looking at Remy. Same as before, she couldn't not hear, not with the other crew watching and the passengers filing past and the whole apparatus of professional decorum demanding its due. But as she passed the galley, she felt a brush of fingers on her hip, quick, hidden by the angle of the curtain, a touch that said soon with more eloquence than any word. Customs. Baggage claim. The particular sensory assault of Heathrow at 7 a.m., the fluorescent pallor, the Pret-a-Mangers multiplying like cells, the resigned shuffle of 1,000 jet-lagged travelers navigating the world's least intuitive airport. She cabbed to the Corinthia. Checked in. The suite was obscene, marble bathroom, king bed with approximately 47 pillows, a view of Whitehall that reminded her she was supposed to be here for work. She set down her bag. Showered. Changed into jeans and a cashmere sweater. Not her work armor, not the blazer and heels, but something softer, something that said, "I'm not here as a consultant." She placed the Krug in the room's wine fridge. Considered it. Took it back out and put it in her bag. At 10:15, she ordered a car. At 10:42, she was standing in the lobby of a Holiday Inn near Heathrow that smelled exactly as Remy had described. Carpet cleaner and regret, and she was holding a $250 bottle of champagne in a duty-free bag and wearing berry lipstick, and her heart was trying to escape her body through her throat. She took the elevator to the 4th floor. Walked down the hallway, narrow, low-ceilinged, the kind of hallway that existed in every crew hotel in every airport city in the world, designed for people passing through. Room 408. 410. 412. She stood at the door. The Do Not Disturb sign was already out. She could leave. She could walk back down the hallway, take the elevator, get in the car, go to the Corinthia, and spend the afternoon preparing for tomorrow's meeting like a sane, responsible professional who didn't rearrange her entire travel schedule for a woman she'd met 3 times. She knocked. Footsteps. Quick. The door opened. Remy was barefoot. Hair down, wet, still damp from the shower, falling past her shoulders in dark waves that caught the light from the hallway. She'd changed out of her uniform into jeans and a silk camisole the color of Merlot, and without the heels, she was noticeably shorter, and without the blazer, her collarbones were bare, and without the professional armor, she was just a woman. Standing in a doorway. Looking at Vivian with an expression that contained everything she hadn't been allowed to show at 37,000 feet. The want, the nervousness, the terrifying sincerity of someone who was in deeper than the situation warranted and knew it and didn't care. "You're early," Remy said. "I couldn't wait. The room's terrible." "I know. You told me." "I'm serious. The curtains don't fully close and the shower pressure is..." "Remy." "What?" Vivian held up the duty-free bag. "I brought champagne. The kind I don't drink. I spent $250 on a bottle of something I've spent 36 years refusing to try because you told me to try it, and I flew 10 hours in a state of arousal that probably qualifies as a medical condition. And I'm standing in a Holiday Inn hallway in a cashmere sweater I chose specifically because it's easy to take off. So if you could please stop talking about the curtains and let me in." Remy grabbed the front of her sweater and pulled her through the doorway. The door closed behind them. The deadbolt turned. And the distance between wanting and having, 10 days of texts and 3 flights and 1 napkin and 1 lavatory and 6,000 miles of airspace, collapsed to nothing.
And that's where we leave them. On the other side of a hotel room door in London, with a bottle of champagne and the rest of their lives about to begin. You just heard the first 5 chapters of High Mistress by Aurora North. The full story, 19 chapters, 10 heat scenes, 1 proposal at 37,000 feet, and an ending that will absolutely wreck you, is available now in audio and ebook. Links are in the description. And if you want the bonus chapter, the scene Too Hot for Amazon, that link's there too. Next time on Fractal Enigma Audio Previews, we've got 300 Miles, a best friend's sister Sapphic romance that proves the only thing more dangerous than falling for your best friend's sister is the 300 miles between you. Thanks for listening. Subscribe so you don't miss it. This has been Fractal Enigma Audio Previews. See you next episode.